First, I just want to say how much I love being your Attorney General, and hopefully got a flavor of how much we're doing with the office, how active we are in many different fronts. I just want to say that the ability with this job to take on big issues and charge the hill, as we like to say, is one of the best things about it. The Office of Military Legal Assistance. Anybody had to work with the military before? Pretty challenging enterprise. We had all the major branches, had to go all the way to DC and back, on top of getting attorneys on board. These are not easy folks to come up with an agreement on how we can move forward, but within a handful of months we were able to implement this brand new program that's now helped over 300 members of our military community, something we're pretty excited about and something that will continue on, hopefully forever, long after I'm gone from this office. Another area that I was really focused on when I ran was trying to make our office better integrated with law enforcement. And you've heard from our fraud unit exactly how we've done that to better partner with our law enforcement. But a lot of that started in my first week in office, where I wrote a handwritten note to every elected sheriff, DA, and chief in this state. And we held the first annual law enforcement summit for the AG's office 30 days after I took office. And we just did our 4th law enforcement summit, and there were 170 folks from law enforcement that came from all over the state, and all of our law enforcement partners. Each one of those has yielded a new success of collaboration between law enforcement agencies. And as Rod mentioned, our chief investigator, a number of those led to referrals to our office so that we can do what we promised, which was how can the AG supplement law enforcement across the state? How can we fill in those gaps, whether it's trying to help file for grants or whether it's to co-investigate or co-prosecute? So it's something that really proud of our guys that have really taken that mission and they're off and running. Another big issue that I inherited when I came to office was a rape kit backlog. How many people are familiar with the rape kit backlog in this state? So when I was campaigning, there was a number of articles about how we were up to almost 8,000 untested sexual assault kits in the state of Nevada. That's something I felt I had one daughter then, now I've got 2 daughters. I felt like it's just totally unacceptable that we are not testing these kits. These victims don't get any shot at justice. There were a variety of reasons why these kits stacked up. And it does date back to 1985. But I pledged when I took office that we would work to significantly reduce the backlog in my first term. Well, fortunately, we created a statewide committee, got all the partners that we need. In fact, it's a 60-person committee, which I normally wouldn't recommend. But in this case, it's been incredibly successful. In each meeting, we continue to address this issue. And just a handful of months ago, so only a year in, we were able to find the money between a few grants and some settlement funds to pledge funds to test all but 200 of the 8,000 kits in the state of Nevada. So it's something we're very, very proud of. We'll, of course, be able to test those last few hundred and be able to eradicate that backlog. But this committee also worked on what legislation can we help push forward in this coming session that will try to make sure we don't get back in the same spot. And we have submitted a bill in office to try to make sure that all jurisdictions are submitting their kits to the 2 labs we have in the state so that we always know how many kits are piling up and people can stay on that to make sure this doesn't happen again. So it's another thing we're very proud of, and obviously it takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. A number of people behind me have helped with that, with a lot of hours to make sure we put all the meat on the bones for that. The last thing Patty touched on, and that was the solicitor's office. When I came into the AG's office, states like Texas had 25 lawyers in the Solicitor General's office, waking up every single day fighting against the federal government. In fact, I met the new Alaskan Attorney General right after I got into office, and I'm asking him, how many people do you have in your solicitor's office? He says, I don't have a solicitor's office. How can that be? You guys are just as bad off as we are. He said, every single lawyer in my office wakes up every day defending the state of Alaska against the federal government. we had no lawyers doing that in our office. We had no lawyers waking up thinking of creative lawsuits to try to protect our rights. And what I always like to say, hey, we are fighting the federal government. We have plenty of bad precedent out there that says the federal government gets to just keep encroaching. But these lawsuits do matter. A number of them have resulted in injunctions, like the Waters of the U.S. case, that have frozen a rule in its tracks before being implemented. But those that even aren't successful, we are slowing this process down, and we're bringing the federal government to the table in many cases, where the threat of Attorney General litigation now says something like, well, that Nevada is just a pain in the you-know-what. They're going to sue us. They're going to be a problem. Let's go to Utah. It's going to be a little easier to get through Utah. And that's not necessarily the case, but you get my drift. So we think this litigation is important, and we think the threat of litigation means hopefully, we stop with this adversarial relationship with the federal government, where they have one agenda and one view of how things should be, and they're going to get there, regardless of whether they have the law to support it, or regardless of whether they have local buy-in and local community support to try to come up with a plan. So I think we've been incredibly successful in that. We've created a solicitor's office. We're now up to a number of attorneys that wake up and do that every single day. And it's something that was obviously near and dear to my heart, someone that cares about our federal constitutional limits and the system that I'm sure folks out here care a lot about, so that you can be left alone and you can go off and do the things that you want and have the life that you want to live without the federal government constantly impeding on all of your rights. So really appreciate everyone coming out today. Really appreciate the time spent. And thank you for everything. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions. All right.
Expanding on this federal overreach that you just were talking about, as regards the sage grouse, and you are opposed to Governor Sandoval's actions as regard coming to agreement with the federal government on the protection of the sage grouse, and also what you consider other federal overreach cases or illegal actions that are considered by the president regarding DACA and DAFA. I mean, you seem to be in conflict with Governor Sandoval on a number of these federal overreach issues. And I was wondering if this is a more rural area, and it has a pretty significant Hispanic population as well. And I was just wondering if you can expand on that difference that you have with the governor.
Well, I've been very clear since I've been elected. The Attorney General's independent Attorney General for the state. It's my job to evaluate the law and determine whether or not we need to protect the state. And so immigration was 30 days into when I was in office. And I said when I ran I was going to avoid politically challenging issues or take polls before I decide whether I'm going to defend the law. It was clear as day in February, and yeah, it caused a stir, but I think we've been more than vindicated through the courts that it wasn't a legal action, that it's something that the president could not do, that he said himself he could not do for many years, and just simply decided that he was going to go it alone. And so, like I've said all along, if we have a Republican president that is doing the things that the president is currently doing, we'll be willing to sue a Republican president in a year as well. I believe firmly in these limits to federal power, and I think they're important for our state, and I'll continue to uphold them.
Can you expand on the sage grouse specifically? Because it wasn't just Governor Sandoval, but it was other Western governors who came to an agreement that there is, the federal government does have a position in the EPA and in protection of our environment. And so that the state's rights do not supersede what is considered environmental protection. And well, so you specifically mentioned the sage grouse, as did your staff member, sure. And it does affect us here. And I was just wondering if you could expand upon that specific issue.
Sure. Well, it is a huge issue, so I'll try to give a succinct answer and not bore everyone. But the long and short is it affects a huge, many millions of acres of northern Nevada, affects our development, our ability to grow. And I joined all of the northern counties in this lawsuit who felt very strongly that the way the federal government was approaching the designation of the sage grouse and land habitat maps was going to really, really hurt our state. I was joined by our Senator Heller and our congressional delegation, or at least most of it, Representatives Amodei and Hardy and Heck. And there isn't a county commission, and all of Northern Nevada does not think that the sage grouse moving forward will greatly impact our state. And so, perhaps the desert tortoise down here is before my time as an AG, but you think of those examples when they move down this line of designating certain things an endangered species, it really removes a lot of local control. And I believe we should have the local control on these issues.
Can I ask another one?
No, you cannot. Thank you. Are you a tracker, by the way?
I am not.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, what do you see as the top 2 or 3 priorities for the next legislative session that you're going to be focused on?
Well, certainly the sexual assault bill that we're putting forward is something that is important that we're going to push for. And then we're working on now carrying forth a number of law enforcement proposals that we hope will help local law enforcement across the state.
Thanks.
Any other
I'm a
questions?
citizen of this.
I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, man.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I have a question about guardianships. I believe I have read, and I hope this is correct, that some of the reason with guardianships being a problem is that we have very lax laws in Nevada concerning them. Can you comment on that?
Well, you may have seen, this would have been maybe a year ago now, they created a statewide guardianship commission that was chaired by the then chief of the Nevada Supreme Court. They've been working through a number of reports, or I should say recommendations on how to fix that. You've heard today what we're working on in my space, because I'm not on the legislative side, and we are trying to devote as many resources as we can to try to help with that. We have joined, and I should say co-started, this task force in Las Vegas with Las Vegas Metro, which is going to be important for the Valley. And we also started major investigation on one of these cases as reported a little while ago. So we're co-investigating that with Las Vegas Metro as well. So, it is a big issue. As Mr. Swanson said, primary jurisdiction for guardianship abuse is local sheriff and local DA. And so we can't steal cases or take cases, and philosophically wouldn't want to do that anyway, but we continue to offer support to try to help investigate and if need be help co-prosecute a lot of these cases. I will add that with what we did, it wasn't exactly clear with what we created in the office. There was a pile of mortgage settlement money. There were these, settlements all across the country, and a lot of that money hadn't been spent. And so as all of these things are spiking last year, that's when I asked my team, what would it take for us to be able to help? And that's when we put together this 10-person unit that would be able to help investigate more, add complex fraud analysis as well as prosecutors. And that unit, we pledged money from the mortgage settlement money that was going unused. We took that to Interim Finance Committee, and fortunately we were able to get unanimous approval of moving forward with those positions, which will sunset, but there's a 5-year plan to use that mortgage settlement money to try to basically boost and go on a short-term sprint on these while the locals can eventually catch up.
That does bring up a question about settlement money.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from judgments in court cases where a person or a company is charged a fee for something they have done improperly, criminally. Are you saying then that these settlements become excessive, and that's how you are able to draw on this money? Why do you have this pool of money?
Well, there's tons of different kinds of settlements, but this was the national mortgage settlement crisis that went across went across the country, and there were, I believe it ended up being only 49 states. I think there was one that was not part, but there was a national settlement that occurred, and each state got their pile of money that was meant to try to alleviate the issues. And a lot of money was spent on things like Home Again and other programs to help that, and we are now using some of this to help combat financial elderly exploitation.
So it can be moved from one settlement type to another government.
It depends on the settlements, sure. But this one was all related towards financial fraud, and so that's why we're using this for financial fraud.
Okay, that is the same type of.
Correct.
Okay.
I like your pushback about the federal government. So, and the Virgin Valley Water District has land to the south where they can drill more wells for water. And so I want to know how you feel about the federal government trying to take over that land and for Gulfview to make it a wilderness area. And that would affect the.
Well, I don't really have any more insight than you may have. I just hear out there that maybe they may try to designate it a national park. I'm opposed to that designation. I'm opposed to the president designating huge acreage in our state as parks without the participation of any local government or local officials like the one that was done about a year ago. So that does impair our ability to grow and make important economic decisions locally. And so, but other than that, we don't have any involvement in it. Yes, sir.
There's a lot going on about this stadium. And is your office involved at all, or will it be involved?
We are not. Actually, the only role our office is that we always have a lawyer on major commissions and statewide boards and things like that. So we have a lawyer that was policing that it was done properly as far as public notice and comment, things like that. But otherwise, we have no legal role in that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
May I ask another question?
No, I'll talk to you after. Thank you.
Well, I am a citizen of this
That's okay.
community, and you're in my city hall.
Thank you all very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate it. We'll be all staying afterwards and answering questions, okay?
May I maybe get a picture of you all here with me?
Sure, great.